Jonathan, do you want to start introducing while I put the screen up?
No problem, yes. So I'm Jonathan Beebe. I am the Chief Enablement Officer and Nurse Consultant for PBS 4. I'm also the Professional Lead for Learning Disabilities for the Royal College of Nursing. And PBS 4 is a not-for-profit social enterprise providing clinically led social care for people with learning disabilities and challenging behaviour. Sam?
I am Sam Corbett. I'm the Senior PBS Clinician at PBS 4. I manage our clinical team and oversee our new transitions as well. I'm a board certified behaviour analyst, have been for a number of years, will be UK BA cert soon, so waiting for that to appear on my signature.
Brilliant. So we're here today to talk about the emerging role of clinically led social care. As I said, PBS 4 is a clinically led social care service. We support 40 people at the moment, roughly. It does change a little bit every now and then. And we're in Hampshire, Dorset, Berkshire and Oxfordshire, and we've just started dipping our toe into Somerset a little bit as well. We're keen to stay in the South Central region. We've got a clinical team of 6 at the moment. I think we have got some vacancies if anyone's looking for work. But most of our clinical team are either board certified behaviour analysts or learning disability nurses, and we also offer career pathways into those professions for those that are interested in developing further.
So we wanted to talk about clinically led social care. It's been a bit of a journey over the past, particularly I'd say we've probably tried to emphasise the role of clinically led social care more so over the last couple of years and kind of demonstrating what that means. So we're going to do a bit of an introduction, more detailed introduction to PBS 4 and kind of the background around it, around how we set up and how we provide support. And then some of the evolution of service provisions, the clinicians across the UK, and actually the barriers that holds with clinically led social care and some of the misconceptions around that, you know, the idea that means there's a clinician on tap 24/7. How we do it in PBS 4, including a lovely case study about a young lady who's agreed for us to share her story, and our learning for the future, and hopefully some other learning from, I know I can see just about from some of the attendees that there's a few names I recognise when I managed to find it. So I don't know that people are doing it in different ways and have had similar successes and challenges. Oh, there we go. So we've talked about quite a lot of the, Jonathan's already recapped onto this, but we've been supporting for 8 years, and that needs updating now because it is now 39 people and will be 40 as of 2 weeks' time. So we are a growing organisation, but we're trying not to grow too quickly, and we don't want to grow through the regions too much. We have a high ratio of clinicians to people we support. Like Jonathan said, we work towards that professional registration, but we also offer opportunities for those individuals pursuing those professional registrations. The individuals we support have autism, learning disability, but we also support individuals with mental health needs. We also support people who have essentially been passed around different kind of support needs services. Formal diagnosis seems to be changeable depending on which piece of paperwork we receive. We work within a model where we provide bespoke support. So we look at whether we can meet someone's needs ultimately, and that has included changing our CQC registration to meet someone's needs. But we're flexible. If we feel like we can offer someone the support that they require within our skill set amongst our operations and clinical team, then we will look at how we can make this happen. The senior leadership team all have a huge amount of clinical expertise. So Jonathan's a nurse and has a master's in behaviour analysis, registered learning disability nurse, and Anna, our chief operations officer, who is now back, has a master's in behaviour analysis. Zoe, our operations manager, has she's a registered general nurse, and one of our area managers has a postgraduate diploma in PBS, as well as our clinical team. So there's a huge wealth of clinical expertise and knowledge amongst our senior leadership team. and we provide significant amounts of training in positive behaviour support. So that includes the induction training, delivering of face-to-face and virtual training as part of our induction process, but also the ongoing coaching and mentoring throughout our training to embed those knowledge as well, because train and hope is not a model that is effective. Jonathan, over to you.
So how have we got here? So we've given you a little bit of an overview of how we've got to learning disability support being where it is today. And obviously time began before 1840, but we've started from 1840 on here. And the reason that that's significant is this is the start of a eugenics movement. So, I mean, you may have heard of eugenics talked about, if you've not heard of it, talked about in the learning disability sphere before. You may have heard of it talked about in Nazi Germany, for example, where it's about how you change a population through selective breeding, and looking at how you try and eradicate certain parts of a culture. Through so the idea was, if the terminology at the time, it's there were concerns about breeding a nation of idiots was some of the concerns that were coming out. So if they could seclude all of these people in their own institutions, then they wouldn't be reproducing and making more people with mental handicap, or whatever they were calling it at the time. And large scale institutions was a common solution to a problem. So if you had a problem, let's build an institution and put people in it. So there were epilepsy colonies at the time. There would have been institutions for single mums. There would have been any of society's problems. It was, let's build an institution and lock it away, and hopefully that will stop it from affecting good society. So that happened for many decades. It wasn't until the 1950s that reports started emerging that hospital conditions were poor and patients weren't allowed to leave. So we've got then back, it's got 1958 was the Brooklands experiment by Jack Tizard. So many of you know that's where the name for the Tizard Centre has come from. The children developed better in small houses in the community than in a hospital. So even back as far as 1958, we were saying smaller services work better for people where we can have targeted need. Then we moved to 1969, where the term normalisation started to emerge. I suppose the most prominent person in the movement of normalisation was the man with the best name ever, Wolfensberger. And he was in Austria at the time, and Austria in the 70s, so things were a bit different then. But he was keen to look at how we treat people with learning disabilities with equal value as the rest of society. So very similar to our principles today. Back then it was a different time, so it was different approaches. So for example, one of Wolfensberger's thoughts was perhaps if people with learning disabilities wore their Sunday best, they'd be respected more. The idea being, if you wear a suit, you're more respected. We're not going to say everyone with learning disabilities should wear a suit, obviously. But you can see where that concept was coming from, and you can see how that's influenced concepts like that are present today. Like, if people have their own tenancy, they've got more value. If people have their own job, they've got more value. If we can try and promote people to be in equal citizenship roles, they'll get treated more as equal citizens. So it's very much led to where we are today. 1969 is the Eli report, uncovered by the News of the World, leading to a national system of regular visiting and inspection of hospitals. So that uncovered abuse and scandal in the Eli Hospital. 1971, Better Services for Mental Handicap was published. So this was the start of seeing change. 1986 was the first closure of a large institution, which was the Star Cross Hospital in Exeter. I mean, the last institution, I think it was 2010, the last large-scale institution was in Dorset that closed. And there are still large institutions around today. Many of you will know of St Andrews, for example, in Northamptonshire. So we've not completely moved away from that still, despite efforts to do so. 1989, Caring for People white paper to set the principles for shift to community care. So this is the start of the Community Care Act. And then 1994 says that Ockenden St Lawrence Hospital closed, which was the one of the silent minority set. You can still watch back all of the silent minority series on YouTube, and I recommend you do. It's really interesting to see some of the things that were normal at the time, like people lining up in a queue to jump in the same bath and share the same bath water. But equally hearing some of the values of the nursing staff there, that they're very much the same as today, very much understanding what's behind the behaviour and wanting people to be equal citizens. And you can see the passion and compassion, I guess, that the people there are sharing. This is obviously just a potted history. It's not covering all the things that have happened in the development of learning disability services. 2001, Valuing People was published, the first ever white paper for learning disabilities. There hasn't been one since, but that set a lot of good direction around learning disability services. Probably most notably was the Learning Disability Partnership Boards and their establishment. And I think that was the start of co-production, really, and the start of how we're looking to really design services with people rather than do things to them. 2011, the horrific Winterbourne View documentary uncovered the abuse that happened at the hospital in Bristol. I'm sure all of you watching will have seen it. If you haven't, then it's a must see. It will stay with you forever, and what happened there should never be repeated. And despite government promises for that to happen, for it never to happen again, sadly it did. But yeah, we saw lots of publications, government publications following Winterbourne View, a lot of them promoting the need for positive behaviour support. So we had a big dash for services to go, oh, I'm doing positive behaviour support, I'm doing positive behaviour support, without really a thorough understanding of what that meant to be delivering positive behaviour support in the UK and how we get quality right within that support. But yeah, it's led to the restraint reduction programme, I guess, has largely come from that as well. Not that what was shown in that programme was restraint, it was abuse. But it really has looked to how are we protecting people's liberties. And as I say, we said there was pledges for it to never happen again, and then 8 years later there's a documentary on Wharton Hall where it was a very different type of abuse. It was more psychological abuse that was happening there, but still you're seeing people with learning disabilities being treated as less than people, which is not right. 2020, Right Care, Right Support, Right Culture was published by CQC. Now, we should have further before that. In 2014, CQC published Registering the Right Support, because I wrote that. And that was the predecessor for Right Care, Right Support, Right Culture. So driven by how do we make sure that regulation is keeping up to speed with contemporary learning disability practice? How do we make sure that we're registering and regulating support to be right for the 21st century? There's lots of misconceptions around right care, right support, right culture. The biggest one is about the numbers. So there is this idea out there that CQC is saying that they won't register support services for services greater than 6 people living in one place. That's not true. It's never been the case. It's saying that's what good practice recommends and that's what they would look for. But it would be for a service to say, we want to register a service for 10 people. We know that's more than what the good practice guidance says, but we are making sure that it's contemporary by doing the following. So CQC would be asking you to demonstrate better how the service is being person-centered. If it's a larger service, is the key underpinning principle. Yeah, that's helping to shift services as well. And then up to today, well, in the last 12 months, we've had the Building the Right Support Action Plan that's been delivered, and then the Edenfield Centre, which was the latest panorama documentary, which is a mental health hospital that showed autistic people receiving abusive and inappropriate support. So that's a bit of a potted overview.
I was going to say there's also been the very recent education setting report as well, which I think it shows that it's not just one setting, it's across multiple settings. These are all various different settings as well. Edenfield was primarily mental health. There's learning disability provision settings as well. There's been multiple reports within residential home settings and supported living as well. So I think part of the reason we've put this in here is we know what needs to be done. There's a call to action, everyone comes up in arms and things, but actually, is it translating to the change that we want to see?
I think it's really valid, yeah, because hospitals aren't the right places for people with learning disabilities. They should never be seen as a long-term solution. They should be seen as, you know, where you go when there is no alternative, or when someone really needs hospital care. But to say that hospitals are abusive misses that any place can be abusive, and we need to not lose sight of that. Everywhere needs to make sure that they are providing high quality contemporary care.
I think obviously after the Winterbourne View, the kind of campaign, the slogan that kind of supported the change that everyone was calling for was homes, not hospitals. And as Jonathan said, that is absolutely, you know, it's not the right setting for someone to be in for any period of time past assessment and treatment if that's required. But ultimately, the home needs to be the right home. And that's where we're trying to look at how we can do things differently, from the delivery of the support as well as the environmental aspect as well. You know, we support individuals who they are not in a position to move out of a hospital setting where they've been for a number of years, potentially in seclusion, and live in a static terraced house with paper thin walls next to neighbours who have never spent any time with someone who has a learning disability or additional support needs. And ultimately, it's about how are we setting up support to enable success.
It's using our behaviour analytical heads as well, isn't it? You know, if we were looking at a person and saying, right, the person is doing this challenging behaviour, and it's causing lots of problems. If our only goal was to stop that challenging behaviour and not look at the function behind what was happening with the behaviour, then another behaviour would pop up to replace that behaviour. So yeah, if I'm punching myself in the head to get your attention and you stop me from punching myself in the head, I might start punching Sam in the face instead to get your attention. The behaviour shifts if you don't resolve what the underlying function is. And the same can be looked at when you're looking at services. If people are ending up in hospitals and those hospitals are abusive, just stopping people going to hospital by making those hospitals there isn't going to stop the problem behind why people get admitted in the first place. And what we have seen is, instead of seeing high quality services develop, we've seen different models of hospital type provisions that appear in the community that aren't called hospitals. We see supported living services that are done to hospital grade, and people being detained in their single person accommodation with high levels of security. So yeah, we need to really think about what is the function and what's the solution from us as a service.
So, yeah, this is going to be much harder because of the way that we're set up, but obviously we're not used to doing virtual. We're much easier tag teaming in person and running, passing a mic between us. But one of the things that it's important to kind of look at, and it's what Jonathan was touching on, is actually the reasons why people with learning disabilities end up in hospital. And my personal experience is the majority of that is not because of a mental health need that needs clinical assessment and treatment. It's usually because the placement is broken down and there's nowhere to go. Whilst there are very clear criteria on what meets criteria for section under the Mental Health Act, those criteria have historically been bypassed and utilised because there's nowhere else for someone to go. And then we support individuals who end up in a cycle of hospital placement and repeated hospital placement, which is why it takes a long time to be discharged. And I don't know whether, feel free to jump in on the chat if there's kind of other experiences as well.
Yeah, I think we find that it's often that Friday 5 o'clock call, isn't it, why people end up in a hospital, because they're their home placement, be that family home or supported living or residential care, is breaking down, and they need a solution fast. We know from supporting people to be discharged from hospital, getting the environment right and getting the team right takes a long time to set up. If you're going to do it right, it takes, I say, a minimum of 12 weeks to get it right, and yeah, it's not easy. So yeah, the immediate solution, I suppose. Quite often there will be concerns about the level of harm the person is either doing to themselves, to those who are supporting them, or perhaps to those in their local neighbourhood. We know that we have lots of challenges with some of the neighbours that for the people that we support. There is still a lot of not in my backyard kind of approach, and you belong in a hospital, why are you in the community mentality out there. And unfortunately, when someone is distressed, it risks not only jeopardising the reputation of that person, but jeopardising the reputation of people with learning disabilities in general and learning disability support. So it's a real balancing act, isn't it? We need to try and maintain faith and reputation in the public. We need to be person-centred and deliver to the person what they need.
Yeah, Jonathan touched on kind of the hospital model supported living that, you know, does appear and stuff. Part of the reason is that the hospital environment is robust. It's secure, it's safe, you know, typically it's secure, safe and robust, and it meets those needs from a very kind of core environmental aspect to maintain safety. The idea of a hospital environment, it has a high proportion of highly qualified, clinically trained nursing support in provisions as well. So actually those elements of it, we can see why they are beneficial in those situations, but actually it's how do we not necessarily directly replicate, but how do we bring those aspects that enable someone to be safe, to enable us to do the skills development, to improve quality of life and meet the function in an alternative way, without just building another hospital for one person, not a hospital environment. And that's something that we don't necessarily have all the answers to. I think we work really closely with housing providers to build creative homes that meet the needs and the design and the layout, so that we're not having to have so much secure settings and environments, and the layout is much more conducive to someone having their own spaces and having that right support. And actually some of the robust furniture has got better. It's much more individualized, people can make much more choice over it and things like that. And it's a really fine balance. I think I know Jonathan particularly has visited environments where they are set up and they are quite hospital spec. And then we've been to environments which are super homely, but not going to be safe for someone to live in. And I think getting it right from the environment is a starting point, but then it's about the skill of the support team around them as well.
Something that we've been really keen to keep an eye on through whilst the restraint reduction network standards have been establishing, for example, has been that restraint is about more than physical restraint. And I think in support there's been a lot of focus on physical restraint. And as I said about the hospital's environment, if you just stop one type of restraint, there's a risk that it will transfer to another type of restraint. So instead of physically holding people, is there a risk people will be locked into rooms instead? And there isn't a hierarchy of what's more restrictive than the other. So nowhere says it. It's very much a personal thing. We were supporting a gentleman, for instance, and the team were convinced that the least restrictive approach when he gets distressed was to vacate the building and lock him in there on his own. What he did when he was locked in the building on his own was he completely trashed his environment. So to me, that shows an escalation in his behaviour and that things are getting worse. when we spoke to the family about what was happening, they said, yeah, he's going to be really traumatized by that. He's got a history of being secluded when he's at school, and actually sitting with him and linking arms with him and reassuring him that everything's okay is going to be a least restrictive approach than locking him in the room on his own. Other people are hypersensitive to touch, and touching them can be really, really painful. So that's not the right approach. Some people might benefit from PRN lorazepam, for example, to calm their nerves, to help them get over the edge of what's happening and get beyond the instant. Other people might have really bad side effects from lorazepam, feel zonked for days, and it really not be appropriate. So there's not a hierarchy of what is more restrictive and least restrictive, but we need to think of all restrictions and what is the least restrictive for that person.
I think it's about being realistic, that actually if someone's been in that highly secluded and, you know, high levels of restrictive practice in those environments, it's naive to think that actually someone's going to move to the setting. We've got a functional behaviour assessment. We know which skills we're going to teach. It's naive to think that we're never going to be in a situation where that escalation is not going to occur. So it's about the reality of recognising that that is a part of delivering clinically led social care in the best and, you know, the most respectful way for the person that we're supporting. And actually, if you've got those safety elements right, you are in an environment where you can do the functional skills teaching, because actually if the safety is not there, you're not in a position to be able to effectively enable the functional skills teaching. So the skilled workforce. So we talked on the previous slide about making sure that we've got a skilled workforce to enable that kind of translation and that clinically led support. And I think this slide makes Jonathan very sad, so I'll let him talk it through.
It makes me happy in some ways, but yeah. So the graph to the left is a very positive graph.
Yes, sorry, this one.
So if you look back at 1988, there were about 35,000 hospital beds for people with learning disabilities in England. Today there are about 2,000. I think that shows, I'm going to show my age, but that shows an incredible shift that has happened in how learning disability care has been delivered in my lifetime. We've gone from a real culture shift of learning disabilities as a health need, and it needs health professionals to treat the condition and to look at how we can support people with learning disabilities medically, to it moving into more of a social model of what we're doing. So I think it's a fantastic graph and shows the progress we've made. Many, I'm sure, would argue that 2,000 in hospital is still too much, and what's happening to get those people out, and that's what the Building the Right Support Action Plan is working on. But yeah, I think it shows we have come a long way, and we should acknowledge that. The figure to the right, that shows the decline in learning disability nursing. So I'm not sure why this, because it's community learning disability and other learning disability nursing. So it's a collated graph. And yeah, without looking at the numbers here, I can go back further than that. So if we were looking at 1995, there were 12,000 learning disability nurses in the NHS. Today, there's about 3,000 learning disability nurses in the NHS. So again, we've gone through seismic shift there about how many learning disability nurses work in the NHS. I suppose the surprising thing is there are 17,000 learning disability nurses on the Nursing and Midwifery Council's register. So going back 2 years, we didn't really know where 85% of learning disability nurses are. I've managed to do a bit of digging and had support from NHS England with that. NHS benchmarking led and an exercise. The data isn't great, so we still haven't got a really clear picture. We found that there are probably about the same amount of learning disability nurses in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, so taking up to about 5,000 or 6,000. And we estimate that there are at least as many learning disability nurses working in social care as there are in the NHS. Some of that will have happened by accident. It will have been that there was an NHS social care provision, for example, that employed learning disability nursing that's transferred to a private provider, and they've had to 2P across the learning disability nurses and not quite knowing what to do with them. Others, it will be organisations like ours that know the value that learning disability nurses and other skilled professionals bring to social care, and how we can design effective social care that can provide the skilled support that people receive in hospitals. There is a lot of skilled support people receive there, in a community setting, and that's not about making hospitals in people's homes. It's about how do we provide clinical support to social care that's happening. So I think it's becoming more and more common.
So Nigel's asked a question about thoughts on the dynamic risk register and CTR, the CTR process. It probably ties in nicely. I would say we've had some really positive situations around that. Actually, it's brought everyone around a table to enable the right people to be able to think creatively. I think some of my recent experience has been our involvement has been prompted from CETR, so the Care and Education Treatment Reviews for younger people who have been at risk, and actually it's enabled people to go, who can we get involved kind of from different elements, and we've become involved from that process, and it's enabled a really creative way of thinking that's not the usual pathway. I think we've also seen some challenges where we've asked for that approach, and we've had people who aren't involved in that person's life and that kind of pathway, and they're kind of suggesting things that maybe could actually be quite detrimental because they don't have the whole, you know, as much as they have some of the picture, they don't have all of the picture. I think there's some huge scope for utilising these systems, but Jonathan, you were going to add in, I think.
Well, I think if you go back to when the Winterbourne Review Concordat came out, it was led by the local government association, the LGA, and there was a lot of criticism of it not going anywhere. It then handed over to NHS England, and CCRs was one of the things that they introduced to make it happen, to make change happen. So the idea being that the commissioner of the service is there with some experts, with a independent clinical expert and an independent expert by experience, and they're reviewing what's going on and what the discharge plan is. And I think that has helped to really shift people to be discharged when there weren't plans for them to be discharged. It's really drove that accountability forward. I think I'm right in saying the dynamic risk register has now changed to be called the dynamic support register, and that's been through the input of experts by experience. And there is, I think that's something that has changed right in our culture over the last 10 years quite significantly, is that co-production feel, the involvement of experts by experience, and that's been very positive. What CTRs get often criticised for is their lack of teeth and their recommendations, and how does it really influence change? How do they make sure that people listen? There are proposed changes to the Mental Health Act that are currently going through Parliament to make them statutory, which will help give them more teeth than they've got right now. How you make statutory recommendations, they've got to sort of figure out some of the working and some of the teeth behind it, but that work's still ongoing. So I think they're positive. I think it's a positive change. I think about half of people that are admitted to services have been known on the dynamic support register before admission, so it's helping to predict and prevent admissions before they happen. But there are still a lot of people who, out of the blue, enter a crisis situation, as you would expect as well, and end up in hospitals.
So this, on contrast to the numbers and the learning disability nurses, this is the numbers of behaviour analysts, so that are board certified. The problem is this is an American qualification and won't be for much longer, but this has always been a challenge in the UK. Who is doing PBS? So if you want a level of professional registration around it, and even then it's loosely professional registration because it's not technically valid in the UK, there's limited pathways to have that oomph behind you. It has grown rapidly in the UK. I think this graph clearly shows that there's been some rapid growth. The bit that is really frustrating and really difficult to work around is the green line, which is the registered behaviour technicians. That role has never translated to UK practice particularly well. I know there's some places that are doing it, and a couple of organisations that have managed to make it sit incredibly well, but it's something that we've looked at and it's never quite fitted with our models. And there are qualifications that are kind of similar levels and mapping and things, but they're not quite fluent enough to work across. So this means that we've got people with an American qualification, American coursework, American studying, working towards an American ethics board in the UK, because there's not much else out there, which is changing with the UK BA cert, which is fantastic. But it also means that actually it's really easy for people to go, well, actually anyone can do PBS then, because there's less professional registration, professional accreditation, and it causes those issues of actually it's also not very easy to become board certified. There's huge amounts of hoops to jump through. So then it becomes actually, well, why would I do that when I don't need it to be a PBS professional? And I think it's about giving the respect to, I am sure, you know, we work with some fantastic practitioners who have, that pathway's never been the right route, but actually how do we give the respect to those individuals that are working incredibly well clinically and that professional registration, but also making sure that we're aware that there are people that are fraudulently using the term behaviour analyst or positive behaviour support practitioner and not doing things in an ethical way and not doing things that's in the right approach for the person we support. And it's that fine balance, and that's something that we've had to overcome. The world is, the UK is starting to recognise BCBA just in time for us to start changing the language. So that's going to be another hurdle to overcome. That actually there are, it's, for me, since becoming board certified to now, the jobs, particularly the NHS jobs that are specifically asking for board certified behaviour analyst is incredible to see. Back when I started looking for kind of master's levels, graduate jobs, there were job adverts that they were asking for behaviour specialist and said you had to have a professional registration, but a master's in behaviour analysis didn't equip you to be a behaviour specialist. But being a speech and language therapist with no additional study did tick that box. Whereas we have come a huge way there, and actually working towards, and how can we get individuals understanding what that means in terms of it having clinically led social care is something that we're constantly striving for. And that's why we focus on having that professional registration within our team.
I'm sure many people on the webinar today will be aware of there are pockets of the autistic community that have a real dislike of applied behaviour analysis, the science of positive behaviour support that underpins what we do. Some of that will be informed by their lived experience, and I'm not going to say that they're wrong. I'm not going to deny them of their experiences and their views, that everyone is entitled to their views. My perspective on it would be that it's misinformed what the views are commonly, and I think it often originates from practices that were from 40-50 years ago and don't reflect current professional behaviour analytical practice. But I think if you're concerned about a profession's practice and its ethics, then why wouldn't you go for a professional that is registered with a professional body, that has to work to a code of conduct, and that has to meet a certain level of training and work to certain standards? It's a real positive way of driving a profession forward professionally and ethically. So it's the safest way to go, I think, in a lot of ways. And the risk is, if people are practicing and not having that professional registration, then they haven't got that level of accountability or level of training, and there are risks. Equally, behaviour analytic practice it's a complex science, and it comes with risks. None of it is risk-free. For example, if I was to use the behaviour I was using earlier, so I'm doing this, and you think, okay, he's doing that for attention, we're going to stop that behaviour by ignoring it. we know because of the science of behaviour that that's going to likely lead to an extinction burst, and I'm likely to turn the volume up, so I'm likely to start hitting my head harder. That then leads to the support, usually without the clinical support coming in and saying, oh, we've got to intervene now. So you've reinforced it at a higher level. Give it another 6 months and the team go again, oh yeah, he's doing that for behaviour, isn't he? Let's ignore it again. And then it turns it up higher. And before you know it, we've accidentally programmed someone to be smashing their head off a table and causing severe damage to their face. Whereas if you understand the science of behaviour, you'd have certain procedures where you don't put an extinction program in place without teaching a functional alternative. You make sure you're monitoring for all of those effects carefully. You make sure you're supporting the environment around you. So with professional training, you make sure there are a lot more safeguards in place before implementing an intervention than you would do, say, if you'd done a 5-day course.
So this leads on to clinicians working within social care, and I imagine this is probably the majority of everyone attending this as well. Most social care providers have, particularly providing support for individuals with learning disabilities and or autism, have a level of clinical support in the form of PBS leads, PBS practitioners. It exists in most companies. It is usually mentioned on websites somewhere. They are strategically built roles into offers. They're talked about within frameworks. They're talked about within commission. Commissioners are looking for that level of support. The challenges that are faced is those roles are often regional, if not national, geographically spread. Incredibly high caseload for clinicians. So the caseload recommendations from the board certification, the BACB, they vary, but I think it can go kind of from anywhere from 10 up to like 20, depending on what your level of responsibility and remit is and who's doing the implementation versus are you overseeing as a consultant or are you directly doing the implementation? So the guidance around that is quite vague. Most of them are internally supervised, so there's limited opportunities for these events. This is, whilst it's a training event and it's a skills development, it's an opportunity to enhance your knowledge. There's not enough events like this out there that are accessible. I know a lot of my continuing education events that I go to are American, they're silly o'clock at night, and there's huge knowledge from them in terms of the direct skill implementation, but some of the practical application does not translate particularly well. And like we've talked about, there's various levels of qualification within those roles, so it's knowing who to look for what support. And we're not saying that any of those roles, people that are incredible practice leaders and a huge knowledge of PBS, we're not saying that they're not the right people. It's what's the right person for that support that's needed at that time as well. And practice leader roles are being trialed, champion roles. We call it a different name. We pick a different name out of the book. We've tried most of them, to be honest. We've chosen most of those names, and trying to embed that into a role that's already overstretched with recruitment challenges as well. A field that's already exhausted. How do we embed these roles where actually what we're saying is we would like you to be a champion? What that in reality across social care generally means is we think you're really good at this. We'd like to give you a badge to say you're really good at it, but we're not in a position to be able to give you any more money to tell you how good you are at it. And that's the challenge. We're putting more and more on a field that's already incredibly stretched. And it's about how do we give people the credit to be able to do it and actually give them the worth and the reinforcement that's actually valuable, because the PBS champion badge isn't as reinforcing as we think it is.
And it'll be really interesting to see the direction this takes with the RRN updating, because I think version 2 of the RRN standards is going to be advocating more for practice leadership roles. We think so. For example, it may be that it's advocating more for direct support staff to have a direct role in training other people in restrictive interventions. That's great in principle, but I think it comes with challenges. Those who are great at direct support aren't always great teachers. Are they going to be leading the values that those that are professionally trained are going to be leading on. As a workforce, the direct support can have quite a high turnover. They don't always stay around long, and it costs what, £3,000 for us to train a trainer. So it's quite an expensive way of training someone who may not stick around for that long. And so there's all kinds of challenges that could be coming from that next time around, but we will face them. On the last slide, it said how many clinicians are there in social care, and that is something that we really just do not know. Social care providers aren't very good at talking to each other and uniting people. What is really lacking, though, is the NHS has a workforce strategy. NHS data looks at how many learning disability nurses they've got, how many associate practitioners they've got. They look at all the staff that they've got and they think, right, this is what we've got, this is what we need next year. You can't do that for social care. They're looking at reducing NHS provision for learning disabilities. There's no real workforce plans that clearly specify workforce that's needed for learning disabilities other than direct support. So how do they know what clinicians are currently being used at the moment, what they're being used for, what they're going to need in 5 years' time? That level of detail just isn't out there.
I think we've covered all of this. I'm just very aware of time, and we've not talked about what we're doing that much. We've just kind of given a bit of an overview. So one of the things how we try and overcome some of these challenges, having a developed clinical team. So we are not an MDT. We don't have a multidisciplinary team, but we do have a combination of board certified behaviour analysts and learning disability nurses, which brings a breadth of experience, and it brings that support and that kind of shared clinical expertise. And we are supporting others to grow into those roles. So we are supporting learning disability nursing apprentices, and we're supporting individuals that are completing their masters in applied behaviour analysis, psychology, PBS. We're looking at developing a clinical assistant role, which is essentially a trainee role, which someone will come in and choose, essentially settle into the role and then choose a pathway. It reminds me of the Goosebumps books, the choose your own adventure one, but go into the learning disability nursing apprenticeship or potentially masters in PBS, and having that pathway and that option, so to be able to move and grow the region as well. We have that needs updating. We did have a specialist clinical practitioner. We've just evolved that title, but actually we do have a strong clinical oversight within our new transitions. So we're setting it up with clinical underpinning from the start. And our senior leadership team have an extremely strong clinical knowledge, which means that it's an organisational wide approach. It's not, so I have, my experiences, and I know other people's experiences of working in different fields, is that the clinical team sit as part of an organisation, but they are they're almost like a bonus add-on. If the funding's there, you get to call in the clinicians, and it's a referral process within an organisation, which means that actually the problem's already a problem by the time the clinicians are involved. And actually by having that embedded clinical leadership and that strategic level input means that we are involved and the clinicians are involved and there from the start, and we're monitoring and reviewing, and it's not a referral based process. It's a ongoing fluctuating levels of strategic fluctuation of how much the clinician is involved depending on the level of need. We make sure that we've got robust training for our team members and ensuring it flows through induction and is followed up in supervision and meetings. We use periodic service review, and we're continuously looking to develop the use of periodic service review as a model for both teaching skills for the people we support and monitoring progress towards skills teaching, but also for our employees. It's an area that is we are growing and we are developing continuously about how we can use the evidence base and the science of periodic service review to support development of knowledge for our team members. That's probably a scratch the surface of how we kind of go about it as well. But it's one of the biggest challenges is helping people to understand that clinically led social care doesn't mean that you've got a clinician on tap 24/7. What it means is that we have a strong foundational underpinning of clinical and positive behaviour support across the organisation. And we're going to give you the tools to be able to implement positive behaviour support. And then when you need us, we're here to be able to provide that expert coaching and guidance. We do loosely utilize the tiered model of positive behaviour support. So we look at, actually, we need to give our team members the skills to be able to approach that tier one, that bottom level, that good quality of support, troubleshooting when things are not quite working to plan, understanding function at the kind of core level, and making sure we're responding to functional understanding and skills teaching around those strategies, which means that actually when we start to move up through those strategies, the clinicians then can be involved, and they're not being involved with writing a visual schedule and writing a daily activities planner, because actually we need our teams to be able to be skilled and competent in that knowledge to free up for when, you know, those high quality functional behaviour assessments and high level functional behaviour assessments are really needed. Do you want to add anything there, Jonathan?
No, I think it's trying to do it by design, isn't it? So we've tried to set up PBS4 from the start to be PBS by design, rather than something we add on and tap into our support. And I'm really encouraged when we hear new starters come and say that they've not worked in an organisation like this before, and how things are done differently, and we still try and do things bespoke. We are seeing challenges with that as we've grown over time, and things have had to change, but it's still there as our founding principles. So it just puts in a good starting point, I think.
So this is not our words, this is a person we support's words, and her kind of journey with PBS. She's given all of the permission to share this. She wants her story to be shared. So we've been supporting Millie for just over a year. When she was little, she was a bit of a pickle and struggled a bit more than most. When she was about 6 years old, I was transferred to, it's easier to read it in Millie's words, I was transferred to multiple schools because I was bullied throughout my school experience, and it really unsettled me as I was moving schools 3 to 4 times a month. I was also struggling with other things going on at home. I then moved to a special needs school, and I started to suffer with my mental health at the age of 11 and needed quite a lot of support. I got in contact with No Limits, and they've helped me through so much these last 8 years. In 2019, my mental health got really bad. I had to go away for a bit to keep me safe. I went away for about 3 years, and then I met the wonderful PBS4, and I'm still with them to this day, and they're helping me to live a positive and independent life. They have helped me to manage living on my own in my own house, which I love. I won't try and do that. My time with PBS4 has been such a great experience. I've had my ups and downs, but I've had support and lots of reassurance along the way. I've learned so much from all of my team that have helped me dealing with emotions when they get too much, and taking the time to listen and understand me. So as Millie said, she's had her ups and downs, and you know, we still go through ups and downs, and she still continues to have those challenges, but we are one of her longest support providers. There are providers that have given up much quicker. Unfortunately, they've given up is the right word to describe what she's been through with other providers, is they've gone, nope, not for us. She has an allocated clinician that provides regular support, including some really bespoke one-to-one sessions, which at the moment is the level of input that's needed, but you know, we can fade. She's a team that are working to understand her needs and support her through the fun times and the more difficult times. She is known throughout the organisation, and everyone, whenever she's in the office and pops in to see everyone, everyone's desperate to spend a bit of time with Millie, and we work towards independent skills. This being said, it's certainly not a continuous lights and shining light. She's has tough times. She continues to have really, really tough times. And actually, when this case study, she was going through a much better time, and she's having a tough time at the moment. But it's about, some of that is about that resilience as an organisation to stick with her and go, okay, this isn't quite working. How do we read it? You know, how do we look at this from a functional understanding, not just from the functional understanding of her behaviour, but actually a functional assessment of the support around her? How do we break that down into what's working, what's not working? How do we look at it and break it down into the components and address those? Because we have a very clear functional understanding of Millie's behaviours, but it's not as simple as just putting in some, you know, give us quick skills teaching. There needs to be the rapport and the structure and the relationship security around to be able to embed that. If it was as simple as we'll just put a quick skills teaching in program, then I don't think there'd be a need for behaviour analysts, unfortunately.
What I say is Millie's not a typical target client, I guess, in a lot of ways. We generally, we're skilled at supporting people with severe learning disabilities and challenging behaviour. So someone with a real mild learning disability, some borderline personality disorder, some mental health needs, is a bit unusual for us. And a lot of the team struggle with capacity and consent issues. So Millie's doing this and she's got capacity, so I can't stop her. But if Sam's going to jump off a cliff, I can say, Sam, that's a bad idea, don't do that. Just because she's got learning disabilities doesn't mean I can't intervene because she's got capacity. We can intervene for anyone, and that causes some challenges for the team. But it is back to the basic principles of what's the function of the behaviour and where's it coming from, and to really simplify it, just as we saw from her own narrative, she's had a bad upbringing, she's had traumatic childhood. She's learned that my identity is, if I do this, I get attention. I don't care if that attention's positive or not. This is what I do to generate who I am and to get attention. Some of the simplest things we did was we've helped her to be the star of our social media, and she's been all over our Facebook, for example. Getting that really positive attention has shown her that the narrative doesn't have to be the same. What we didn't foresee was other people we support going, oh, I don't like that, and seeing it as quite competitive. So we had to tone it down, and I think in some ways she's now missing that, and that's led to some of the challenges that's happening at the moment. So a very simplified overview. But, yeah.
And actually some of these examples that we have are more kind of, I'd say, the more typical support that we provide, the skills teaching, the supporting dental visits, desensitisation. The supporting to VHS to DVD was one of those situations where the clinician was working really closely with the team. We put everything in place. This person watched Robin Hood on VHS, and we realized that we were running out of all of the Robin Hood VHSs in the world, and thought, actually, we need to be able to support him to cope with that transition, which is, a really common situation. So we put all the strategies in place and then got the DVD ready. We're really equipped for the transition, and he just coped with it. So it's one of those situations where actually it's much safer to have the clinical underpinning and the skill set and to be able to cope with that strategy. And then sometimes actually that transition is not the challenge that you think, but it meant that we were able to overcome any challenges. Weight loss support, supporting hospital discharge to home, direct personal emotional skills, reflection support from the team, resilience, that reflection and that clinical support for our teams who are going through that support and providing that support in those really intensive environments is vital. It's not an easy job by any means, and actually being able to provide that reflective practice support, helping people to understand it's not personal, there's a function, there's a reason why these behaviours are occurring, bring it back to that, has been vital for supporting with resilience with our team members. We support individuals where the clinical involvement is we just get to hear the good news stories because they don't need the clinicians anymore. And hospital discharge, setting up the environment from the start, but putting in strategies. This is someone who's experienced huge amounts of seclusion and segregation throughout their lives. And actually being able to put a withdrawal protocol in, which works on in identifying the early indicators for someone needing the space, but then putting in the proactive responses, and actually this person's able to communicate when they want some space from their team, and then being able to bring themselves back in through the rapport that they have, and not just going, they didn't want me there, so I'm going to leave them for 5 hours. Working with how do we reintroduce ourselves into those situations and focus on rapport building.
I think we're out of time.
Yeah, I know. Hugh's starting to move forwards.
So yeah, we'll probably leave it there. But yeah, we've got some ideas about what's needed going forward, and I suppose the clearest of those is we need a mandate. We need something that says clinicians belong in social care, and for market position statements to look at how they want learning disability services to have clinicians within them, to respect clinicians in social care, because it seems like if you're in the NHS you get respected, if you're in social care you don't. So yeah, there's some ideas to leave you with, and I'm sure all of these slides will be available to you afterwards for you to consider in your own time. So thank you for your time. I think we'll call it a day there.
That was fantastic, guys. Thank you very much.